guys, welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you're new. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing my own version of something that was pretty popular here on YouTube a couple of years ago, to be honest. And that was the sort of Instagram plans my day style of video. There were a lot of vloggers that were doing this type of challenge. And I thought that it would be kind of cool to do my own version of this with an art journal page. In the original style of the video, the person would put up a series of polls to guide things like what they were going to eat, what they were going to wear, and where they went. However, in my version of this idea, I thought that it would be kind of fun to try posting a series of polls, again over on my Instagram, to use as guidance for layers that I ended up using on an art journal spread. So with that idea out there, and with that being said, let's get into it. As I go through the different parts of this video, I will be putting the final results of the polls up on the screen. Now, the first poll that I did had to do with the colors for the spread. Because all of the polls that I used had only two options, I asked if I should use warmer kind of earth tones or cooler sort of sea tones. In the end, sea tones won with 63% of the votes. I then asked what kind of paint I should be using between acrylic and watercolor. Acrylic won this poll at 62% of the votes, which did work out for me since I really love acrylic paint, and I think that probably that could have had some impact on the results of the poll. Because I use acrylic so much in my work, I probably attract the type of people that like the finished results of acrylic. But anyways, I wasn't complaining. So with my color palette and type of paint selected, I chose a spread in one of my art journals that already had some background texture, and I applied a couple of different blues to the majority of my spread. There are a couple of different methods that I use for adding acrylic in this way to my spreads. Sometimes I will add one color and let it dry completely, and then block in a second color so that it doesn't blend together. But in this particular page, I did kind of want to experiment with that blended effect. So I put both of the colors on my page while they were still wet, and blended them on the page with my paintbrush. Now, once that first layer was dry, the next poll I put up had to do with background collage. The poll itself was between book paper and imagery/pattern, and book paper won with 72%. This result is one of the ones that actually kind of surprised me. I don't use a ton of book papers in my art journals, or at the very least, I use kind of magazine images and textures and those types of things a lot more. So it was interesting to me that this one won. So in order to complete this step, I used a couple of different kinds of book paper. One of the ones I decided upon was a Japanese text, which I actually have available in my Etsy shop if you want to purchase some for yourself. And I will leave the link to that in the description of this video. And I also used a piece of dictionary paper that I had previously painted on. Then I simply tore these papers pretty randomly and glued them down with an Uhu glue stick. Now, the next thing I asked in the polls is if I should add washi tape to this page. This was a pretty basic yes or no question, and 82% of the results were yes. So I ended up using a black and white striped washi tape, and I simply added a few pieces of that over my background. This is probably one of my favorite washi tapes just because it's so versatile and I use it in all sorts of different spreads, and it always seems to match whatever I'm doing. After the washi tape was down, I wanted to add some more paint, And I went with acrylic again, since that is what the results of the poll were previously. And this poll was about whether I should use a paintbrush or a palette knife to apply the paint. 72% said palette knife, so I used just a cheap plastic one to add in a sort of light sea foam kind of color. With this layer, I was really just trying to blend in some of the pieces, such as the collage or the washi tape, that kind of felt like they were just sitting on top of the page, and I just wanted to incorporate them a little bit better. After that, it was time to stencil. My poll regarding the stenciling was about whether I should use paint or spray ink to do my stenciling with. 69% of people said spray ink, so I selected a stencil and got to spraying. I used a Dylusions ink spray in the color Vibrant Turquoise, and to be honest, this ink/stencil combination wasn't necessarily the best option for this particular spread, because a lot of the ink sort of soaked underneath the more intricate details of this particular stencil, and so it wasn't nearly as defined as I would have liked for it to be. But that's perfectly alright. It was just another layer out of the many layers I was incorporating, and so I tried not to get too caught up on that. Now, background stamping was up next, and I asked if it should be noticeable. This was one of the weirder polls, I think, because I didn't quite get across what I was asking, or what I had intended to be asking. And because of that, I think that the poll was a little closer, but 52% of the votes said that yes, it should be noticeable. So I added my stamping in black ink. Everything ended up getting a little bit muddled with this spread, so I do actually come back later with the little hand-carved compass stamp that I used near the beginning, and I stamp it again in a different spot so that it does show up quite a bit more noticeably in the end. After that, the focal image was the next thing I wanted to add. So I asked a couple of questions about the focal image. The first thing I asked was whether I should collage down my image or if I should draw it from scratch, and 62% of the votes said to draw it. The next question I asked was regarding the number of faces I wanted to add to the page, and the options were simply 1 or 2. And surprisingly, again, the result was 62% saying 2. With these kind of base ideas for my focal images pretty set in stone, it was time to just get started drawing them. I mainly used acrylic and colored pencils for this, as I do in a lot of my art journals, as I have shown previously quite a bit on this channel. But for this particular spread, I also inked the faces. And my main reason for doing this was simply that I didn't feel like they stood out quite enough for my taste. Now at this point, we are kind of reaching the end of this spread. The next poll asked about the text that I was going to add to the spread, and whether I should use stamping to add it, or if I should handwrite it, and writing won at 71% of the votes. As for the quote that I decided to add to the page, I selected this from a suggestion that I also received over on Instagram, and it says, "Dream no small dreams, for they have no power to move the hearts of men." And I just really liked that quote, and I felt like it fit pretty well with the page. And so I ended up writing that just in pen. Additionally, before I wrote that, I did use a few watercolor pens to add some little strands of hair to what would have otherwise been a pretty solid color. And these are the same watercolor markers that I used in one of my past videos where I did a sort of first impressions. I'm starting to find ways that I like using them in my artwork where I was a little bit confused in that first impressions video. So it's always fun to feel like you are starting to find your own way of using supplies. Now for the final touches in this spread, I asked if I should do paint splatters or glitter, and splatters won with 58% of the votes. So I used white paint mixed with just some water, and I flicked it at my spread using a paintbrush, and I was ready to call this spread complete. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I certainly had a lot of fun making it. It was quite a bit different from what I'm used to doing with my art journal spreads. Usually I work very intuitively and without a real plan in place, and so actually having these steps laid out for me was quite interesting. So thank you all so much for watching. You can subscribe if you want to see more videos like this or very different from this in the future. And until next time, happy creating!